Hello everybody, I am Mr. Kleeman and I'm going to take you through the next riveting episode of Math Notes. On today's episode, we are going to learn about absolute value equations. Absolute value. Wow, if only everything had value. Alright, learning objectives. Today, what we're going to do, we are going to be able to solve absolute value expressions. Actually, we're going to be evaluating them. No solving involved. No equations. We'll just be evaluating what absolute value expressions look like. So what exactly is an absolute value expression, you might ask? Because theoretically, by the end of this, you will be able to evaluate an absolute value expression. Well, first let's talk about what the absolute value does. The absolute value is an operation. It actually performs an operation on the number. And the way we think about the absolute value is we think about how far away that number is from zero. So oftentimes what you'll see us do is you'll see us put the number on the number line and we'll see how far away from zero that number is. For example, the absolute value of -4, where -4 here is to the left of 0. Oh, that's not a very good angle with my hand right on the camera. Sorry, a little distracted there. So -4 is, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4 units away from 0. And then what about +4? If I look at +4, how far away is +4 from 0? And we can see that +4 is also 1, 2, 3, 4 units away from 0. 1, 2, 3, 4 units away from 0. So both -4 and +4, they both have the same absolute value of 4, because both of those numbers are 4 units away from 0. So that's the idea of how to evaluate an absolute value expression. Absolute value can be thought about as the distance away from 0. And it is an operation, so it has a place of where we want to go ahead and perform this operation. When do we want to make it positive? Absolute value is a form of a grouping symbol. It is a grouping symbol. So the things inside are grouped together. So let's think about absolute value as the distance away from 0. All right, moving forward. So how do we evaluate absolute value expressions? Well, here we have, which we're asked here in problem number 1, can we evaluate the absolute value of 5? So this is written as the absolute value of 5 if you're thinking about how do you read that math. Because reading mathematical notation and language is important. Now the absolute value of 5, really what that question is asking is how far away from 0 is the number 5. So if I go to my number line, I put 0 on my number line, and then I go to 5, how far away from 0 is 5? Well, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units away from 5. Maybe that seems obvious to you, maybe it doesn't, so count it out if it doesn't. The absolute value of 5 is 5. It's always going to be a positive number. Absolute value will always take a number and make it into a positive. So for number 2, what is the absolute value of -5? Well, I'm going to draw a number line. I'm going to put 0 and -5 on the number line. And I'm going to figure out how far away from 0 is -5. And that's going to be my answer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, -4, -3, -2, -1, and 0. So here we have moved 5 units to get from -5 to 0. We're not really concerned about the direction of movement. We're just counting how much space there is. It's the absolute value, regardless of sign. So here the absolute value of -5 is 5. All right, now moving on to problem number 3, and I'll change up colors just because I can, and maybe create a little separation. Whoa, come back. And maybe create a little separation between what we've done so far and what we're about to do. So here on number 3, the way you read this, and the way I would read this is saying, well, first it says negative absolute value of 5. I wouldn't read it as negative. I would read it as the opposite, which is kind of what negative signs do, is they turn it into the opposite sign. The opposite sign of absolute value of 5. And maybe I should write that out instead of doing the symbols. So the opposite sign of absolute value of 5. Meaning that if I can find whatever the absolute value of 5 is, whatever that answer is, make my answer the opposite sign of that. So let's think about the opposite of the absolute value of 5. Now the absolute value of 5, if you remember, we did already here in problem number 1. So if you come up here to problem number 1, and you see what we have here, and I wish there was like a laser pointer on here or something. So if you look at problem number 1, it says the absolute value of 5 is equal to 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, in order to find the absolute value of negative 5, which is the question that I'm being asked to do, that's going to equal the opposite of, well, what did we get for up in number 1? We got 5. All right, so that's my answer. My answer is the opposite of 5, which is also known as negative 5. So I can write that right there. So notice that when there's a negative on the outside, my answer is going to has to be a negative. So over here, looking at problem number 4 now, I got to keep my hand out of the camera because what's the point of having a camera if you always got your hand in front of it? All right. So problem number 4 says find the opposite of the absolute value of negative 5. Find the opposite of the absolute value of negative 5. So to do this, I am going to have to find the opposite of whatever I get for the answer for the absolute value of negative 5. Now, if you draw your attention to problem number 2 above, in problem number 2, we identified the absolute value of negative 5 as 5. So really what I'm trying to find is, what is the opposite of 5? The opposite of 5 is negative 5. So my answer over here is yet again negative 5. So look, the negative sign was on the outside of the absolute value symbol, so my final answer is negative, because we have to do inside the parentheses first, or inside the grouping symbols first, so we do the absolute value first, and then we do take the opposite of that, which is really multiplying by negative 1. So we do that after we do the absolute value. So do the grouping symbols first. All right, next. A single expression inside the absolute value bars will always end up making the value blank. A single expression, so if I just have 7, or negative 7, or 5, or negative 5, if that's inside my absolute value bar, that's always going to end up making the answer of the value what? Positive. Positive. Come on, don't start lagging on me now. You've been doing so nice. Positive. P-O-S-I-T-I-V-E. Positive. All right. And then question number 2. A negative on the outside of the absolute value bars will always make the value. Well, let's see if it's on the outside of the absolute value bars. Outside of the absolute value bar. Well, the absolute value bars is going to make a positive. So then a negative on the outside is going to turn the positive into a negative. It will always make the value negative. I think that's pretty clear if-then type of thinking. If there's a negative on the outside, your answer is negative. All right, very good. All right, let's kick it up a notch. And let's take a look at a little challenge. So in this challenge, I'm wanting to see if you can write 2 separate problems, expressions, absolute value expressions, that will give you an answer of negative 12. I guess the directions don't say they need to be absolute value. So that would make one really easy. Let's see if you can write one, at least one, using absolute value. Try to do them both with absolute value if you can. Alright, why don't you put me on pause while you think about how to do that. And then I'm going to go ahead and write the answers down, so when you unpause, there's going to be a couple examples of ways that you may have written this. So put me on pause, and when you're ready to come back and check, come back and check. Pause. All right, welcome back. This is two possible answers you may have gotten. You may have said the opposite or negative absolute value of 12 would get you an answer of negative 12. As would, I mean, it's negative, so I do need to have a negative on the outside. And if I do the absolute value of negative 12, that would also work, because negative, well, let's see, the absolute value of negative 12 is 12, so negative 12. Yeah, that would work. So maybe that's what you wrote. Those are the two most obvious answers. If you wrote something other than that, let me know, and I can tell you if it's right or wrong. Or let your teacher know. They can tell you. All right, now we're going to do some of these absolute value simplifying problems, but we're going to do them with some substitutions. So we're adding in the idea of variables into these expressions, and then what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to replace the variable with what we tell you the variable is equal to. So for example, these problems here, the next four problems, are all going to tell us that when we see an x, we can replace that with negative 1. When we see a y, we can replace it with 3. And when we see a z, we can replace it with negative 4. My stylus keeps dying on me. I got to go to my backup. All right. So in problem number 7 says, evaluate 16 minus the absolute value of 2z plus 1. Remember, absolute value is a grouping symbol. So when we go to evaluate this, we're going to want to have to do that first. Now, here's my suggestion. Step 1, and I'll write this down because I think it's that important. Step 1, yeah, that's my handwriting, is to draw parentheses around all variables. I'm writing slowly so I can have decent handwriting. Draw parentheses, that is an E, to spell parentheses the right way, around all variables. Now in problem number 7, there is only one variable. It happens to be the variable z. So I'm going to draw a parenthesis around variable z. Alright, that's step 1, done. Step 2. Step 2 is going to be to copy our expression exactly, symbol for symbol, everything except for the variable. We're going to leave it blank where the variable is. So step 2, copy down everything except the variable. And if you want to combine steps 2 and 3 together, step 3 is going to be put in the number that's equal to that variable into the parentheses. But I'm going to do it slowly. I should probably do this. So let's see. Step 2, copy everything except for the variable. So this is going to look like 16 minus absolute value of 2 times parentheses plus 1 close parentheses. Not parentheses, absolute value brackets, which behave like parentheses in terms of order of operations. But it is important to remember they are absolute value brackets. Okay, step 3, I'll go back to the red here. Step 3 is going to be, I thought I went back to the red here. Anyway, is to replace the variable with its value. For example, we know in this problem z equals negative 4. So we're going to end up putting negative 4 into our parentheses. So replace the variable with its value. And then step 4 is our last step. Now, it doesn't mean that we're necessarily done, because our last step is going to say simplify using order of operations. Now, order of operations, we know, tells us to do inside first. So now I'm going to go ahead and simplify this. So this is a couple steps to simplify it. So I have to simplify it. My first step would be to do 16 minus, and then 2 times negative 4 is negative 8 plus 1. Good. And then I still have to do negative 8 plus 1, so I'd have 16 minus the absolute value of negative 7. Now I do the absolute value. Looks like I might have to move me out of the way. So now let me draw my workup over here. So 16 minus, and then what is the absolute value of negative 7? That's right, 7. And then 16 minus 7 is equal to 9. So the final answer for number 7 is 9. Whew, I took a lot of space for that. It was right in the steps. I'm not going to write the steps every time, but you should have these steps written down. So that work kind of went over to there. So number 7, the final answer is 9. Now we look at number 8. Number 8 says, find the absolute value of x minus y plus 4. Here I go. I am going to draw parentheses around the variables. Maybe, if it lets me. Where are you? Oh no, it's laggy. Alright, I'll do it slowly. Draw parentheses around the variables, and then write the expression with just open parentheses there, and then fill that in with what they're equal to. Started getting greedy on my speed. Alright, and then plus 4. Alright, now let's plug in those values. What does x equal in our problem? X equals negative 1, so I'm going to put negative 1 right there. And then y equals 3, so I'm going to put a 3 right there. And then I have to simplify using order of operations. So my order of operations is to do parentheses first. So inside my parentheses, which in this case are absolute value brackets, I have to do negative 1 minus 3. Negative 1 minus 3, so I'm at negative 1, and I go more negative by 3 units. I end up at negative 4. And I'm still in the absolute value brackets, and I still have to add 4 when I'm done figuring out what that is. Now my next order of operation is to do the absolute value brackets. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. Then I still have the other plus 4. So here we can see the final answer for problem number 8 is 8. So number 8 is 8. If you have questions, let your teachers know. A couple more problems, and then we'll be finished up. So number 9 is absolute value of negative 3y plus z minus x. So let's take a look and see how to do this. Draw their parentheses. Draw your parentheses. Looks like we have 3 different variables here. So I'm going to go ahead with the absolute value of negative 3. That's going to be whatever y is, and then that's whatever z is. And then I have minus x on the outside. So we'll see y is 3, z is negative 4, and x is negative 1. And maybe now you try and simplify this on your own using order of operations, and then check back in with me after you're done and see how the work goes. So put me on pause, and then check back in. All right, let's go ahead and finish simplifying this. Negative 3 times 3 is negative 9, and then plus negative 4. And then I have minus negative 1. Okay, so I'm going to end up cleaning up that minus negative 1 and writing it as a plus. But I'll do that on the next step. Negative 9 plus negative 4 is the same thing as negative 9 minus 4, which is negative 13, because I'm going more negative. And then minus negative 1, as I talked about, I'm going to turn into plus 1. Now, the absolute value of negative 13 is 13, and then I still have the plus 1. So the final answer here is 14. And lastly, number 10, let's draw our parentheses. You try this one on your own. Put me on pause, write it down, follow the 4 steps, come back, check in with me, and see if you got the right answer. Okay, so as we check back in, go through the steps with you. I put parentheses around the y, the x, and the x up from the original expression, and I replaced the y with 3, the x with negative 1, and the x with negative 1. I then followed the order of operations, and inside my grouping symbols of absolute value, I had to do multiplication first, so I did 3 times 3, which is 9. And then I had minus negative 1, which I turned into plus 1. So inside the absolute value, it now says 9 plus 1. And the negative 2 is still sitting out in front. And then on the back side, it's still minus 7 times the absolute value of negative 1. But if you consider the absolute value of negative 1 also at the same time, the absolute value of negative 1 is 1. So instead of writing minus 7 times the absolute value of negative 1, I wrote minus 7 times 1. So now we have in our second line, negative 2 times the absolute value of 9 plus 1 minus 7 times 1. So we still have to do the grouping symbol. We haven't finished inside the absolute value yet over here. So 9 plus 1 is 10. That's where the 10 comes from. And at the same time, I did 7 times 1, which is 7. Now the absolute value of 10, I would figure out the absolute value of 10 is 10. Now I have negative 2 times 10 minus 7. With negative 2 times 10 is negative 20. Minus 7 takes me to negative 27. All right, if you have questions on the math or anything to consider like that, please reach out to your math teacher. Or if you want to reach out to me, you can find me at jkleeman@allofschools.net. Good luck moving forward.